Howdy, my name is Stacy Spons and this is INST 301. Today we are going to look at culture and what exactly culture is and how it affects the classroom. On our next slide, we will go over the learning objectives for this lesson. Our learning objectives for today are that by the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe the meaning of culture and how cultural diversity in American schools today impacts learning and teaching. You will be able to discuss what defines social class and socioeconomic status, including how SES differences relate to school achievement, and you will be able to answer the very important question, what role does culture and diversity play in education? In this lesson, we are going to take a broad look at the interpretation of cultural diversity. So we will examine social class, race, ethnicity, and gender as it relates to diversity. We begin with a look at the meaning of culture. Many people associate this concept with cultural events, sections of the newspaper, museums, festivals, concerts, and so on. Culture has a much broader meaning. It embraces the way of life of a group of people. Now we're going to take a closer look into what exactly culture is. So what exactly is culture? Our textbook defines culture as the knowledge, values, attitudes, traditions that guide behaviors of a group of people and allow them to solve the problems of living in their environment. Now, when I mention a group of people, that can be defined many different ways. It could be your religious groups, your ethnic groups, racial groups, gender, social classes, and there's many others as well. We all belong to many different groups, and these groups we belong to influence our culture. Within culture, there are two different types. There's explicit and implicit culture. Explicit culture, according to your book, is the superficial factors. So it could be dress, food, language, rituals, customs. And implicit, if you remember from our last lecture, kind of means internal. So those are going to be things that are harder to observe. They might not be as easily understood. They're more behind the scenes. So some examples of implicit culture could be your religious groups, your spiritual practices, maybe it's your educational values, your fears and attitudes, how you perceive things, your values. Those are all things that are internal, where someone's not going to see that just by looking at you. Our next bullet point is cultural diversity. Cultural diversity is what shapes us as people. It shapes our identity and influences our behaviors. Culture is our way of being. More specifically, it refers to shared languages, beliefs, values, behaviors, and material objects that are passed down from one generation to the next. We are now going to watch a video, and as you watch this video, it's going to talk about different concepts and aspects that make up culture. While we watch this video, I want you to be thinking of different things that both you have in your life that are implicit and explicit cultural aspects that make up who you are as a person. You will fill out a discussion post after watching this video and respond to two of your classmates over what cultural aspects make up you as a person.
In his book, Beyond Culture, Edward T. Hall developed the iceberg analogy of culture. The cultural iceberg theory suggests that, like an iceberg, there are only some aspects of culture which are visible or which, in other words, lie above the surface of the water. These can include language, food, greetings, art, music, and many others. These are the explicit manifestations of culture. They are easy to see, taste, or hear. But according to Hall's theory, these are only the tip of the iceberg. The majority of culture, like an iceberg, lies beneath the surface. These aspects are not immediately visible. They can include worldview, religion, spiritual beliefs, decision-making models, power relationships, respect for authority, concepts of time, and many others. These are the implicit manifestations of culture. They can exert an important influence over behaviour, values, feelings, and thoughts. The more immersed we become in a cultural environment, the more these hidden aspects are revealed to us.
Now that you have had time to post and comment on your peers' thoughts via discussion board, it was very interesting reading what y'all thought were your own implicit and explicit cultural aspects that make up you as a person. I hope you've noticed the similarities and differences between you and your peers. Now we are going to dive into another important factor that makes up cultural diversity.
Here, I want you to take a card, put it on your forehead. Don't look at the card. I want you to take the card and I want you to put it on your forehead. And take a card, any card. And I want you to treat other people like the race that is on their forehead, okay? So everybody has a different race. Nobody knows what their race is. So I want you to really go for it, because this is real. You know, this isn't just an exercise. This is real life. And I have a dream that you will really let the sparks fly. Get her done. There's this great Chris Rock bit about how streets named after Martin Luther King tend to be more violent. I'm not going to do it, but it's... Oh, this is a good one.
Hi, how are you?
Fine. How are you?
Great.
Push it.
I admire your culture success in America.
Thank you.
Bam. Let's do it. Let's get ugly. Let's get real.
Okay. If I have to do this, based on stereotypes that are totally untrue, that I do not agree with, stop.
Okay, all right, no. All right, that's good. You need to push it. You know, you could go a little bit further. All right. Okay. Kelly, how are you?
I just have the longest meeting.
Oh, welcome to my convenience store. Would you like some googie googie? Oh, I have some very delicious googie googie, only 99 cents plus tax. All right. Yes. That was great. She gets it. Now she knows what it's like to be a minority.
Before we get into this next slide, I want you to pull out a piece of paper. As you see, there are a bunch of words on this slide. I want you to take a minute and go through this list and write what type of person these words are describing. Go ahead and pause this video and take a few minutes to complete this activity. Now that you've had time to think about what type of people these words are describing, we are going to take a closer look into what exactly a stereotype is and how it affects our education. Maybe you thought violent described a man and cute was describing a little girl. There are many different ways that we stereotype without even knowing it, just like in the video we just saw. So another important factor in cultural diversity is the way that we view others. Your book doesn't go into a lot of detail about stereotyping, but according to Walter Lippmann, stereotyping is the act of characterizing a specific person into a larger group of people. The use of stereotypes is a major way in which we simplify our social world, since they reduce the amount of processing we have to do when we meet a new person. By stereotyping, we infer that a person has a whole range of characteristics and abilities that we assume all members of that group have. Stereotypes lead to social categorization, so us categorizing people into different groups, which is one of the reasons for prejudice attitudes. This is the them and us mentality, which lead to ins and outs of groups. Some stereotypes that might be brought into the classroom are race, which neighborhood a student belongs to, previous test scores. These are all things that teachers sometimes do without even knowing it. They might categorize a student into a certain group just because of where they come from or which neighborhood they belong to, or even what test scores they got on a standardized test. So you might be asking yourself, are there any advantages to stereotypes? It seems like all we're doing is grouping people together into something that's not true about that individual person. One advantage of a stereotype is that it enables us to respond rapidly to situations because we have had a similar experience before. And so this could be any type of thing where you are able to relate to that person because you've experienced before, because you know what they're going through. You're stereotyping that situation. On the other hand, one disadvantage is that it makes us ignore differences between individuals. That's what we talked about before, where you're categorizing people into groups without getting to know them first. So when we categorize them, we ignore the differences between individuals, and therefore we think about people, what we think about people might not be true, aka us making generalizations. Now we are going to take a look at social class. A social class is a large group of people who occupy a similar position in an economic system. There are several different dimensions of social class, and some of those include income, wealth, power, education, ethnicity. While defining social class in the U.S. is difficult, most sociologists recognize four main categories. There's the upper class, middle class, working class, and the lower class. Let's examine these concepts further. Your book does not talk about these different dimensions in much depth, but from further research, we can come to the conclusion that income refers to earnings from work or investments, while wealth refers to all of those assets an individual owns. This might be cash, savings of a checking account, real estate, and things like that. Work is considered to be an important dimension of social class as well. People commonly give greater respect to those who have more prestigious occupations, and that might be also a stereotype that we talked about as well. In society, those with high prestige occupations often belong to more privileged categories of people. When it comes to occupational prestige, the highest rank occupations such as physicians, maybe doctors, dentists, engineering are typically held by men. Likewise, education is an important dimension of social class. In fact, education is one of the strongest predictors of an occupation, income, and wealth later in life. Most better paying jobs require a college degree. And there are some jobs that require less schooling, but those usually bring in less income and are less prestigious. Finally, it is argued that nothing affects social standings as much as being born into a particular family. The family you were born into has strong predictions on your schooling, your occupation, and income. Likewise, race and ethnicity are linked to social class in the United States as well. Your book does not go into a lot of discussion about upper class, middle class, working class, and lower class, but through extra research, we can come to the conclusion that the upper class makes about 5% of the population and earns about $200,000 a year. Some earn much more than that. In general, the more a family income comes from inherited wealth, the more likely a person is to belong to the upper class. The middle class makes up about 40 to 45% of the population in the United States and is perhaps the most diverse of all the social classes. People in the upper class level have an income between $112,000 and $200,000, while people in the lower level of this class have an income between $48,000 and $112,000 a year. The working class makes up about 1/3 of the population. Working class families are vulnerable to financial problems because of the lack of wealth they are able to accumulate. Most people in the working class hold blue-collar jobs and make between $27,000 and $48,000 a year. Finally, the remaining 20% of our population makes up the lower class. Many people in this social class live in poverty, work part-time jobs, or do not have work at all. Society segregates the lower class, especially when the poor are racial or ethnic minorities. Some sociologists use the term underclass to describe those individuals who are located at the bottom of the class system. normally composed of racial and ethnic minorities. Socioeconomic status, or SES, is a term used in variations with wealth and power, control over resources, and prestige. Unlike social class, most people are not conscious of their SES. One characteristic of students who come from a background of poverty might be health and nutrition. Overall, poor people are less likely to exercise, get a proper diagnosis from the doctor, receive appropriate medical attention, or be prescribed the appropriate medications. Nutrition plays a crucial role as well. Children who grow up in poor families are exposed to foods with lower nutritional value. Moreover, poor nutrition at breakfast affects the development of the brain, even from a young age. Skipping breakfast is highly prevalent among students who come from a background in poverty, and it negatively affects their academic achievement. When students experience poor nutrition and bad health practices, it is harder for them to listen and concentrate and learn. What can a teacher do about this? A teacher could ask for PTO support to get snacks into the classroom. They can remember that even just having something as simple as a snack might help their students focus and learn because they won't be hungry. There are also programs set up for students to eat in the cafeteria before school starts for a different plan for children who come from poverty families. Another characteristic might be a student's vocabulary. According to research, children who grow up in a low socioeconomic conditions typically have a smaller vocabulary than middle-class children do, which raises the risk for academic failure. Children from low-income families hear on average 13 million words by the age 4. In middle-class families, children hear about 26 million words during the same period of time. That's a lot of words that are different. In fact, toddlers from the middle class and upper class income families actually used more words when talking to their parents than low SES mothers use when talking to their own children. This often creates a large gap between students who come from the lower class and students who are in the upper class and middle class. So what can teachers do? Again, teachers can build vocabulary into their everyday routine of the classroom. They can use new words and describe those new words, explain them to the students. Including vocabulary in an engaging activity, such as maybe creating flashcards for students to learn, will really help students catch up in that gap. The last characteristic we are going to talk about is relationships. A lot of times, children who come from backgrounds in poverty experience chaos at home. They experience maybe parents are absent or incarcerated. They experience being raised by older siblings or raising younger siblings themselves. They are also surrounded by negativity. Children in poverty commonly receives twice as many reprimands as positive compliments, compared to the 3-to-1 ratio of positive to negative in the middle class homes. This means that they are constantly being surrounded by negativity instead of hearing things that build them up. So again, we might ask ourselves, how does this affect our education? What can teachers do? Well, teachers can be understanding. They can understand that students are coming from backgrounds that are not life-giving. They are not being built up, and they can give positive, specific praise when deserved. So that means calling the student out for something that they did that was appropriate or that was on task. This will really help build up their confidence. Teachers can also let these students know that they care for them. They can push their students to do the best that they can and help them along the way. Now I'm going to talk to y'all a little bit about an incredible opportunity I had over spring break to visit Italy. While we were in this beautiful country, we did not specifically see how poverty affected the school systems. We did have the opportunity to visit an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school. This was an incredible opportunity. Through visiting the schools in Italy, we were able to immerse ourselves deeply into their culture. Like I mentioned before, we did not specifically see poverty in the classrooms because we were there for such a short amount of time. However, we saw lots of cultural aspects that were visible or explicit factors that made up some of the students we met. We got to see how they dressed, what they ate, and we even immersed ourselves into their culture, their language. So these are all things that we saw, so this would be that explicit factor we talked about earlier. Some of the implicit cultural factors we got to discover while talking to different students were their thoughts and views on religion and how that impacted their lives. We got to hear about different expectations teachers and professors had for their students in the classroom. Overall, we got to experience Italy in a way that rooted us deep into their culture and ways that we talked about during this lesson. It was an opportunity I will forever be grateful for, and I will bring these experiences into my own classroom. Being educated about culture and seeing it firsthand is an experience I believe everyone should take the opportunity to see. So as a final project, I want you to now pick a country and research it. You're going to research the school system of this specific country you pick. You'll see the instructions on eCampus. You're going to be looking at different explicit and implicit cultural factors and how they affect the school systems in the country that you picked. You will write down a report and present this project to the class next week. I think you'll like this project because there's a lot of freedom and creativity built in. I look forward to hearing your presentations and seeing just what cultural factors you decide to look at, both implicit and explicit. I hope by now you are able to see just how much culture and diversity affect the classroom. I hope you are able to answer our learning objective for today and the important question we asked ourselves at the beginning of this lesson. What role does culture and diversity play in education? We talked lots about culture and diversity and just how it affects the classroom, and I hope you are able to see just how important it is and how important it is for teachers to recognize different cultures and diversity. Thank you for watching. Here are my cited sources for this project.